So we're going to go ahead and get started, and as people trickle in, we might redrop certain links into the chat. We might re-answer certain questions just to clarify. But thank you all so much for joining our webinar today. So we have a couple members here from California Sea Grant. So this webinar today is our webinar to inform you about our 2024 State Fellowship Program. So it's our informational webinar for prospective applicants, those just wanting to know a little bit more about the program, get some questions answered. So that's what we're going to do today in our hour and a half. My name is Delaney Medina, so I'll be leading our webinar today, and I'm the Fellowship Program Coordinator. So my role is I sit on the Science Integration team at California Sea Grant, and my role is to help facilitate and run our fellowship programs, and the largest one being our State Fellowship, which we're going to talk about today. We have some other folks with us that are going to be helping behind the scenes, and I'm going to pass it over to Madeline to introduce herself and tell you a little bit about her role at Sea Grant.
Thanks, Delaney. Hi, everyone. My name is Madeline Wampler. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the program analyst for California Sea Grant. And I was a 2019 state fellow. For my fellowship, I was placed with the Port of San Diego. So throughout the webinar, if I have any questions specifically with my experience as an alumni, I'm happy to answer that. And we'll also have a panel later where multiple alumni will be able to answer your questions as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Herminia Robles, and I am the financial manager here at California Sea Grant, and I oversee the administration portion of all the fellowships. So if you have any financial questions, I'd be more than happy to help you with those in the chat or during our Q&A.
All right. Thank you, Madeline, and thank you, Herminia. So they're going to be behind the scenes and helping to answer any questions and monitoring our Q&A today. And we did have a question already if this will be recorded so you can watch at a later date. And it absolutely will. So let's kind of dive into some housekeeping for our webinar today. So we're going to ask and encourage all of you to utilize the Q&A for our webinar. So you can drop your questions in the Q&A and I'll answer them throughout our presentation. We also have Madeline and Herminia behind the scenes to help answer. So if any questions arise that you might have, go ahead and drop those into the Q&A. It just helps us track with what we've answered so far and any maybe duplicate questions that we're receiving. So we'll want to kind of minimize asking questions in the webinar chat. And we don't want to be using the hand raise function if we can. So any questions you have, we're going to drop in the Q&A. We're going to try to answer questions as we go through, but we do have a session at the end. So around the 12:45 mark is what we're aiming for, where we're going to have some fellow state alumni joining us, and they're going to talk about their experience. They're going to be here to help answer questions. And at that time, myself and Madeline and Herminia will also be open to answer any other questions that maybe you didn't have a chance to ask throughout our presentation today. Couple of things. So this will be recorded. It's going to be added to our RFA for this opportunity on our website. So if you want to watch at a later date, you want to maybe write down some important thoughts or some dates, that'll be available to you. So that will be added to our website later today. And lastly, it's stated in the RFA on our website, so it's stated in this fellowship opportunity. But if you have any really specific questions, we're going to ask that you reach out to SG Proposal here on this slide. So this bottom email, sgproposal@ucsd.edu, is going to be the best way to get your questions answered, the best way to reach me and other folks on the science integration team who might be able to help assist you when it comes to applying through our portal EC grant, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And eligibility questions and any other questions you might have. So our agenda today, so we are going to talk a little bit about who Sea Grant is, and then we'll focus on California Sea Grant, which the opportunity is being presented by. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the actual state fellowship program and what sorts of things you could expect as a fellow. And we'll talk about the application as a whole, since that's sort of the first step that we're in right now. Is if you are interested in wanting to apply, we'll give you some application tips and things to just consider. And then we will invite our alumni to join us, and you'll be able to ask them questions and hear about their experience. So as I'm referring to our website and The application, so the information about our fellowship program, you can take a look at our chat, and Madeline's going to be dropping in some links throughout. So if you want to click those and open them up and have them in a separate window and kind of have it open as we go through, you're more than welcome to do that. All right, so let's get started. Who is Sea Grant? If you have an understanding of who Sea Grant is, or if Sea Grant is sort of an entity you haven't heard of so far. So we are a nationwide program. So we have a national Sea Grant office, and there are Sea Grant programs that are located across the whole nation, including Puerto Rico and Guam. So we are located in any coastal state, also including states around the Great Lakes. So there are about 34 programs nationwide. And Sea Grant was established in 1966 by Congress, and really it was established to develop and build relationships between universities and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, to utilize local resources, city resources, state resources, and even on a federal level to really focus on coastal resilience and ocean policy, and really understanding what we can do across the whole nation in terms of forward movement to make sure that we have really healthy coastlines and healthy oceans. So we really utilize all the different programs and lean on one another in terms of researchers, scientists, experts, in order to draw that expertise for the various things that Sea Grant as a whole does. So you can actually see this map here and seeing where we are stationed all around. So our California Sea Grant is actually down here in the southern part of California. We also have a USC Sea Grant just located up the coast from us a little bit. So California Sea Grant, we are one of the largest Sea Grant programs. We manage one of the longest coastlines in the state, and we have a lot of work that we do within our own program here in La Jolla. So our specific mission is to provide the information, tools, training, and relationships needed to help California conserve and sustainably prosper from our coastal and marine environments. So how do we do that? We basically are broken up into 4 different sectors. So we focus a lot on grants and funding. That is a really, really big thing that we do here. So we will facilitate scientific review for scientists and researchers that are proposing different research projects that pertain to our coastline, ocean policy, water management. We also are sort of an avenue for a lot of funding that's coming down the pipeline to different researchers and different groups across the state of California. So grants and funding are a really big thing that we do at California Sea Grant. We manage some of the largest funds across any Sea Grant program in the nation. The second way we sort of make our mission come to life is through our fellowships, which is why all of you are here today. So we offer many different fellowships, whether they're science, research-based, policy-based like the state fellowship. And then we also focus on education, communication fellowships as well. So we really try to leverage those different areas to create opportunities for young professionals, graduate students, postgraduate students, to sort of make those connections of how we can sort of inspire the next generation of coastal leaders. And the last 2 things that we really utilize and are sort of really intersect with our grants funding and our fellowships is communications and extension. So our communications is our comms team, and that's really how we get the word out about what we do here at Sea Grant, and how we share those stories of what our researchers do that we're funding, what our fellows are working on, and what our different agency partners and our relationship with them, and sort of how we're involved with policymaking in California. And a lot of that is done through our extension, which are specialists that are situated across the whole state of California. And these are folks that are really focused on different types of work, whether it's working on healthy coastal ecosystems. We do a lot of fishery and aquaculture work. We're really focused on coastal economies and communities, and looking at local groups and community groups, tribal groups, and understanding really how we can build connection within communities across the state. And then we really also try to provide that education, training, and just providing information to the public. So this is California Sea Grant, our mission, what we do. This is a really special year for us, 2023, because it's our 50th anniversary. So we're having a celebration this year, and it's really just speaks to the work that we've been able to do at California Sea Grant. We've existed for 50 years, and I'll get into a little bit later how long our state fellowship program's been around and sort of numbers around that. But I definitely had to touch on the fact that this year is our 50th and an opportunity to show off our great logo. So as I mentioned, with Sea Grant as a whole across the 34 programs in the US, every Sea Grant is positioned at a university in those coastal states or the Great Lakes states. So for us here at California Sea Grant, we're actually located at the University of California, San Diego. And we are sort of under a second umbrella of that hierarchy, which is we are also located on Scripps Institution of Oceanography's campus. So we're right here situated in La Jolla, and UCSD is the university that we have our partnership with, linked back to the National Sea Grant Office in Washington. And I wanted to add this in, just a little fun fact, that our actual offices are located in pretty historic buildings on Scripps campus. They're the little cottages, and these cottages have been around since Scripps started in the early 1900s. And one of these cottages, a 3-bedroom cottage, was actually for rent for $12 a month in 1914. So very different landscape back then. Today, this is what our cottages look like. This is where our Sea Grant office is. And I just wanted to share that with all of you because it's a beautiful view, and all of the staff here just feel really fortunate to work here and get to do the great work that we do. And thank you, Madeline. Madeline dropped a little link to learn a little bit more about California Sea Grant and what we do. I could go on and on. We're a really large program. We offer a lot of resources and information. So definitely encourage you to check out our website and look at all the different things that we offer. All right, so we're going to kind of dive into fellowships now and then focus in on our state fellowships. So what is a fellow? How is it different from maybe an internship or a job? For this slide, I really want to focus on what is a fellowship. It's essentially a workforce development opportunity. Really think about it as an educational opportunity, a training opportunity. It's where you'll potentially be able to be involved in things that maybe you wouldn't be able to in an internship or maybe in an early career position. So you'll get to be a part of conversations, have a seat at the table, and really understand what are the different stakeholders involved, what types of conversations are happening. And these are a couple pictures of past cohorts that you can see. So we bring together our cohorts every year for an in-person meeting. And I actually believe the bottom picture is Madeline's cohort. I can see Madeline in that photo. So a lot of history with our cohorts. It's sort of evolved over time through the pandemic and now post-pandemic. So the program has looked differently every year, but we'll get more into that in a little bit. So where does the state fellowship program fall in terms of other California Sea Grant fellowships? So you can see, as I mentioned before, we offer a couple different fellowships, whether they're research focused, policy focused, or focus in that education outreach component. So you can see the state fellowship falls as a graduate fellowship. So we're looking for applicants that have just graduated either with a master's degree, a PhD, a law degree. And the state fellowship's actually modeled after the Knaus Fellowship, which is a fellowship that happens on the federal level at Washington. And so the state fellowship was sort of adapted and evolved in the 80s to really mimic that fellowship that's been really successful. So the state fellowship, it's a one-year program. We offer it every year. And in the summer, this is the time when we're prepping and getting ready to start recruiting for our upcoming cohort that usually begins their fellowship in the following year. So for this cohort, it'll be January through March 2024. But this is a great graphic just again to show you and kind of highlight the different fellowships, how they compare to one another. And our website, and it's the link's been dropped in the chat. You can learn a lot more about the different fellowships, which ones you might qualify for. And in there is where you'll find a lot more information on the state fellowship as well. All right, so these are some statistics to just inform you a little bit about the program history. So the program started in 1988, and at the time we only had 2 fellows. Today, the program's grown. This cohort, we have 26 fellows across the whole state positioned at different agencies. And the total running number for fellows is 308. And this is a number we're really, really proud of at Sea Grant. Over the years, the program has just slowly continued to grow exponentially and really building upon the partnership Sea Grant already has in place and also seeking new partnerships with host agencies, whether those are at the state level, federal level, or even nonprofits. So we're really proud to say that we have 308 fellows, 26 of those being current fellows with the 2023 cohort. So this is a program that provides a one-year fellowship in a federal, state, or municipal agency. And it's an opportunity for you to learn a lot more about policy and management in the state of California. And this picture here, we just like to keep to sort of capture all the faces that have been a part of California Sea Grant and really the impact that these people have had. So many of our fellows have gone on to be really successful in the personal goals they set out when starting the fellowship, working for the host agencies that their fellowship was with, leveraging the skills, the training, and the workforce development that they experience into new opportunities that maybe they hadn't thought of before. So these are just sort of here to capture how many people that have been a part of our impact. And our current cohort is actually in the bottom right here. So this is our current cohort of fellows that we have this year, the 26 of them. So I just wanted to keep this up here to show you really what our impact looks like. All right, so prior I talked about, who are the fellows and what is a fellowship. So this is what a fellowship is not. It is not an internship. You're not a student. And you're also not an employee. So through this fellowship program, we have many stakeholders involved. We have many sort of overarching umbrellas in terms of support when it comes to program logistics, finances, so making sure your award gets administered monthly. But it's really important to remember that through this fellowship, you're not an employee of California Sea Grant, not an employee of UCSD, Scripps, and you're not an employee of the host agency either. So you might be thinking, how is it a one-year fellowship, and how do you sort of work out those logistics of making sure that you're having a fellowship experience, but you're also providing that working time. So that's something you work out with the host agency. Once you start your fellowship, you sit down, you sort of create an individual plan or a goal for your fellowship. And then that's when you talk about those logistical things like maybe vacation time, sick time, and working hours, where you'll be expected to be in terms of your work, if it's going to be completely remote, if it's going to be a partially remote job, and maybe you're flying up to Sacramento once a month, or maybe you're solely based in a new city. So at that time, building up to that, you talk about those things, and throughout our whole process, we'll remind you of this over and over again. So this is information that you'll be able to remember. And then someone dropped in the chat, if the internet might be unstable. So let me know if others are experiencing the same thing. You can drop that in the chat. It could also be individual as well, but hopefully you guys are seeing and hearing me pretty clear. So who is eligible for this opportunity? Who are we looking for? So we want those who have recently graduated, whether you have a master's, a PhD, or a JD in a certain coastal or marine related field. So we are really trying to provide our fellowships with the support from these fellows that are not just looking for opportunity, but can also bring to the table experience from their own graduate programs and being able to look at California and the state of California through that lens. We really want people who are willing to have a seat at the table and understand that you're a part of these conversations. You're helping to develop policy management. You're working on scientist reports. So there's many different things that you do at a fellowship. It really just depends on the agency, but having an open mind is the best way to approach this. You might come in with a certain idea of exactly what you want to do, but you really want to be open to letting the pieces fall in place. You might end up working for an agency that you didn't expect. Maybe your skills directly translate to the agency you get placed with. Maybe it's skills that you've already learned and built through your degree program, and you can sort of begin to build upon them in a new light, in a new area of coastal management and conservation policy work. So just be open-minded is the best way I can sort of give advice in approaching this fellowship program. All right, so we're going to move on to our next slide. And we did have a question in the chat. If you can, try to remember to utilize the Q&A function. So this is from Ryan, and it's, who is considered a recent graduate, less than 1 year post-grad, or does 1 year post-grad still qualify? So I actually have a couple lines down in our eligibility, but we actually asked that for those who recently completed a degree, we asked that it is, you have completed a degree after May 1st, 2022. So if you graduated prior to that date, that would mean that you're not eligible for this program. We really try to keep it very close to the program start. So that's in a couple of slides. So I'll touch back on that when we get there. And then we had a question in the chat. So what are some examples of showing that one is capable of working alongside state and federal partners? I'm actually going to save that question as well until we get to our application, because I'll be able to answer that a little bit better at that time. So hold on to that thought. We'll keep it in the Q&A and the open section. So where do our fellows end up? So this here shows you just some numbers over the years of where they've ended up. And really, they end up all over the state of California. They end up outside of the state of California. So it really just depends. So you can see we have folks that move on to municipal work. We have folks that move on to work at a federal level, a state level, NGOs, private sectors, and also they decide to go back into academia. So maybe they go into professorships or working at universities. So really, the landscape's really broad where fellows might end up. So it really just depends. But these are just some numbers to sort of reflect that. I'm going to turn off my fan here. The nice sun is coming out today. So for this slide, this is actually our current 2023 state host agencies. So this is just to sort of, again, give you another broad landscape of who our fellows are positioned with this year in our agencies. So you can see that these are agencies that are spread out across the whole state of California. We have a few that are situated here in the city of San Diego. We have a lot of them that are positioned up near Sacramento, where the state capital is. We have many that work out in the Delta, San Francisco area, Sacramento. We have a few that, fellows that are based out of the Santa Barbara area. So it really just depends on the agency, but this is here to just show you what our current hosts look like. All right. And so we had another question come through the chat in regards to eligibility. So are you eligible for the program if you're a master's student and have completed all of your coursework and research, but plan on defending your thesis in early spring 2024? So for this fellowship, you have to have all degree requirements completed by the start of your fellowship program in 2024. So that would mean if you're going to start either January, February, March, it really depends on the host agency. At that time, when you start the fellowship, you will have to have all degree requirements completed. So if you do have some specific questions, I know oftentimes you complete all of your degree requirements, and I know there might be lag time with defending theses or getting papers published. So that's a question you can always send us to the SG proposal at ucsd.edu if we need to get a little more granular in understanding if you're eligible or not. But overall, you have to complete all degree requirements. So if that's a very strong requirement for you to earn that degree, earn that master's or that PhD, then the answer would probably be we would encourage you to wait until the next 2025 program. And is there a draft document of the 2024 hosts? So we have it now. So these are our tentative hosts for the upcoming year. We say tentative because we are in the process of working on budget commitments with these hosts. So this is the time of year where a lot of the fiscal years have come to a close, new ones starting, new budgets are starting. So we have to say tentative because we have not completely finalized the host positions yet for 2024. But these are those who applied. So we want wanted to share that with all of you so you can see the different agencies and get a sense of the different positions that could potentially be offered for the 2024 program. So we have a lot of our repeat hosts, Ocean Protection Council and Delta Stewardship Council, are folks we've worked with quite a long time. We've got the California Coastal Commission, California State Coastal Conservancy. We've brought on some new partnerships like with Monterey Bay Aquarium, and they'll be hosting and wanting to host a new position this year in their education department. So really spreading and sort of diversifying our opportunities just outside of policy work, but also thinking about it through a lens of education and communication. And you also might see, as I kind of go back and forth between these two slides for tentative hosts, that you'll see some that are listed twice. So that's something to consider when thinking about this fellowship opportunity, is that some agencies host one fellow. So you're the sole fellow at that host agency. But there are some that host more than one fellow. So you sort of might have a sense of more of the a smaller cohort within the larger program cohort to sort of lean on those other fellows in terms of your fellowship experience. It doesn't necessarily mean you're all in the exact same place in terms of where you're located in the state of California, but it's just something to consider. So as this process moves on, and if you're selected to move on to an in-person or a Zoom interview, and then to a finalist fellow where you get to actually meet the host agencies, these are sort of the things we want you to start thinking about during this whole process. And so the second page, you can see we've got California Fish and Game, Caltrans, and the State Water Resources Control Board. So we also have, which Madeline dropped in the chat, you can look at last year's host positions to really understand more granular how detailed the positions are, and sort of what are the expectations and in the positions and what the hosts are asking for. So that's something you can check out. And again, we just dropped that in, Madeline dropped that in the chat. So thank you, Madeline. What you'll see down here is July 14th is when we plan to have all final host positions posted on our website. So they're going to be posted on the page that our fellowship information is on. So where you found out about this webinar, that lovely page on that website about the 2024 State Fellowship Program, down at the bottom, that's where we're going to post all of the positions. So that's an approximate date, but start checking back July 14th so you can start looking at what the upcoming positions will be. So those will be the finalized ones that we've decided on. All right, so we're going to get into the award and talking a little bit more about your application and really what are some tips we can give you in terms of applying for this opportunity. So this is a paid opportunity. It's a paid fellowship program, and you receive a monthly stipend. So you can see that Sea Grant administers $62,236 per state fellow. And that monthly stipend is received at the rear of the month. So over the 12-month period, you receive that stipend at the end, and that stipend includes it's supposed to provide you with your living expenses, and it also includes health insurance as well. So the total monthly stipend would be $4,978 a month. In terms of health insurance, just keep in mind that that is something we ask for proof of every month through what we call a progress report. So fellows submit monthly progress reports, and they will have to let us know that they have health insurance. So that's something we require for each of the 12 months of the fellowship program. UCSD and Sea Grant doesn't offer any type of health insurance programs for you to look into. So that is something that once we get to that stage, we talk more about, but that is something that we ask each fellow has to do in terms of being considered an active fellow in our program. So just something to consider. And in those monthly progress reports, we also asked for you to give updates on what you're working on with the fellowship. So again, that's something that is a little bit more important at a later date when we host what's our finalist webinar. So we had a question come in asking about the tax situation for fellows. So this is a great question. So California Sea Grant, our stance is legally we're not allowed to provide tax information or tax suggestions. So if selected as a fellow for the program, what we encourage fellows to do is to seek out that information, whether it's from a tax expert or your local IRS office, to understand how to manage that money yourself, and what to do. So we legally do not give tax advice. UCSD cannot give that advice. We don't have any resources for you. So that is our stance when it comes to taxes with your award. And yeah, so that's what we encourage our fellows to do. And you're always welcome to reach out to alumni to ask what they have done since they've been through the program as well. The last thing I want to note with our award is that we also administer $2,500 for the whole fellowship program, and that is for you to use for travel. So something you get to do is potentially travel with your fellowship across different states. You can also utilize those funds for professional development, in-person meetings. We have folks who will do site visits, and these are all opportunities that help them with their fellowship program. So this is a travel expense that's administered for the entire year. So it's a really great opportunity for you to think outside the box of what trainings and opportunities you want to do to add to your experience. It's also opportunities that maybe your host agency wants you to participate in. But $2,500 is what every fellow is provided. And then something else to think about too is some agencies actually end up adding additional travel funds depending on the agency and what their needs are. And one last thing, because we just have the one question still in the chat, which is the tax situation. So just also to reiterate, is that you actually do not receive any tax documents at the end of your fellowship. So that's something that we want to iterate as well in this. It's not just providing that information or guidance that we are not allowed to do, but you also don't receive any documents. So that's why it's really important that you seek the advice of a local IRS office or a tax expert to help assist you when it comes to your tax situation. So thank you. All right, so let's keep going on. We're going to talk about eligibility and your application. So we've touched on this a little bit, but we do ask that all degree requirements are completed at the start of your fellowship. So those fellowships start in 2024, and typically they're starting in the months of January, February, or March. So again, it really just depends on who your host agency is and what your situation is. If maybe you're relocating for the fellowship, or if it's going to be a remote position, so maybe you can start a little bit earlier. So again, that comes kind of later down the road when understanding who you're placed with and sort of what your needs are, and then what are the expectations of the agency. So that date too, May 1st, 2022 is when we have asking those are people who are going to be eligible to apply for this program. And again, if you have further questions because of thesis defending or papers being published, you can always reach out to sgproposal@ucsd.edu, which Madeline dropped again in the chat. So thank you, Madeline. All right. So application requirements. So these are what we ask for in an application. So in an application, you actually will be making an account through EC Grant if you haven't done so already, and if you're someone who hasn't already been applying and working on your application, maybe this is the first time you're learning about this opportunity, but we use EC Grant for all of our application materials to be processed through. So we ask for a CV, and we ask that it be no longer than 2 pages, 12-point font. Anything past 2 pages, we don't consider. So please remember that. If you see page limits, if you see word limits, really take those seriously, because our program, in the way that we sort of maintain equitability across applications, is understanding that we have those set standards. So anything beyond that, we can't consider in your application. We also ask for a personal education and career goal statement. So this is a way for you to express why you're interested in the program. What are your career goals? In this personal statement, we also include an icebreaker, which was something that was added a few years ago. Just an opportunity for you to have a little bit more fun with expressing who you are as a person. So there's more details about that on our website, which we have dropped in our chat here. Couple other things, we ask for 2 letters of recommendation. So one of those just needs to be from a professor or a faculty member, just someone who's very aware of your academic career thus far and can really speak to your academic abilities and research abilities and things you've worked on throughout your degree program. When it comes to the letters, some questions that come up often are the letter writers having to make an account through EC Grant? How do they submit letters? So when you go through the application process in our EC Grant program, you're going to see an opportunity to share a link with your letter writers. So they don't have to make a full account. They can just simply submit that way. And that's a great way for you to share that link with them really early on. That's one of our tips, which I'm going to share again, is if you want a really solid letter and you want a letter that really speaks to who you are as an individual, giving them ample time to do that is something we really encourage people to do. So our website really can become overwhelmed, EC Grant, when we have many people trying to upload on the due date. So that is something we really encourage people, is that you're taking the time to really give yourself that lead time to submit all of your materials ahead. So you're not doing it on the day it's due, an hour before it's due. The last thing is we ask for copies of your undergraduate and graduate transcripts. So these can be copies, they can be unofficial copies. And with your transcripts, with your CV, we ask you that you have to redact all personal identifiable information. So your home address, your student ID, social security number. So anything that can be tied back to you, your phone number, we ask that you redact that out of your CV, and also if your transcripts have that. So you can either do that, with your CV, you're able to just not include that information. With copies, we encourage you to just use black boxes to redact that information when you're submitting these PDF attachments and these materials to the EC Grant website. So just remember that. We have it in red here, bolded at the bottom. Just please make sure you're redacting all of that information. It's really important because when that gets moved to our review process, that is something that we don't want our review panel having access to. So it's for your safety and, of course, to create, again, that equitability across the board with our applicants. So please remember to do that when submitting. Oops, let me go back here. We just have a couple more slides. And as we roll through these last few slides, we're going to be starting to think about our alumni Q&A session. So we're going to talk a little bit about criteria in terms of how we review these applications and sort of end on what are some tips we can provide for you. And then we had a question come through the chat. Is there a checklist of personal pieces to remove just to be safe? That is a great question. We don't necessarily provide an exact checklist of everything that you should not provide, but if it's anything that can be tied back to you, you're going to want to remove that. So again, street addresses, a student ID, your cell phone number, anything linked with your social security number, your parents' birth dates, what city were they born in. So anything that's personal information. The application will have your name, will have your email, because that's how you make the account in EC Grant, and that is enough for us. So I would say anything beyond that, you want to make sure that you're redacting that information. And you can always email us if you're not sure about a certain piece, and we'll be able to answer that really quickly for you. Are there any specific instructions for the letters of recommendation, word limits, page limits, formatting? Yes, if you check out our program and opportunity on our website, which we've been dropping through the chat, there's a section for the letter writers, and it tells you there any sort of limitations that we want for the letter. So I encourage you to just go to our webpage and look down at the letter writers section so you can see what are some maybe limitations that we ask for in terms of the letter writers for the letters of recommendation. All right. So let's go to evaluation criteria. So this is what we look at. This is what the reviewers are utilizing in terms of scoring applications. So diversity, appropriateness of the experience. So will this fellowship benefit you? What will you bring to the fellowship? Statement and communication skills. So understanding how you're expressing who you are and what sort of experience you have thus far, how you will benefit from this fellowship, what you will bring to this fellowship also weighs very heavily. And then you can see that additional qualifying experience, maybe you have past jobs, past volunteer opportunities that you think will really contribute. So listing those really helps us in terms of reviewing applications. Your academic ability weighs at about 10% of the total evaluation criteria, and then your letters of recommendation are about 20%. So again, that 20% weighs pretty heavily. So picking really great letter writers who can really speak to who you are and your experience, mentors you've had, that's going to be really beneficial for your application. And then at the bottom, this is just sort of a note. It says finalists selected by California Sea Grant staff and alumni. They're based on the application materials and interviews. So when you submit an application, we spend a month scoring those applications and going through this criteria with a fine-tooth comb. At that point, we then decide who to bring in for an interview. So really having a strong application to get you to that interview is something that's really going to help. Oftentimes people express themselves differently and have certain strengths. Some people are very great at expressing their goals in terms of writing them down. Others do a lot better in terms of that in-person expression. So just keep that sort of holistic experience in mind. If you're someone who maybe wants to lean more on an interview, make sure you have a really strong application. If you're someone who's maybe hesitant with interviews and you're looking to gain that experience, again, make sure you have that strong application to help with that. So it really just depends on the applicant, but this application provides many opportunities for you to be able to share about who you are with us and why this would be a great opportunity for you. So what are our reviewers looking for? So this is from the reviewer's point of view. So our reviewers, again, are California Sea Grant staff and State Fellow alumni. So we spend about a month reviewing these applications and scoring them. So things that we kind of consider, and I'm just going to read through them. Was the goal statement specific, direct, and concise while discussing what the applicant would bring to and gain from the fellowship? Was a career or life goal stated? So that's sort of thinking really big picture of how can this benefit you in the long run? Did the applicant describe volunteer and/or extra activities that you've been a part of? So that's kind of going back to additional qualifying experience. So really tell us who you are. You can share those opportunities through your CV, also in your personal and career goal statement. Did the applicant provide insight into their diverse background, including balanced and appropriate coursework? So really giving us a sense of what you did in your research, what you did as a student, and also getting us to understand who you are. With California Sea Grant and this fellowship program, we really look through all these applications through a lens of DASIA, which is our diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and accessibility lens. So we really strive to diversify our pool and not just diversify it, but make it available and make it an opportunity that many different people can have a chance to experience. So just share about really who you are and your background. And again, try to give us some insight into who you are as a person. So a couple of other things, just thinking about your academic achievements and how those sort of have led into what your goals are professionally. Some other things our reviewers consider is how did the applicant describe their marine and coastal science or policy experience? I just want to kind of note this. Some feedback over the years we've gotten from our host agencies is oftentimes fellows sort of look at this piece, prospective applicants, and they describe what they would do for a certain agency, what they would do for the state of California. But we want you to really speak to the experience you've had so far. So make sure you also contribute that piece to your application. So not just your big goals, but talk about what you've done already. That's something that's always really enticing and impressive to the reviewers is thinking about those opportunities. They may seem small, but to us, they're really important so we understand who you are as an applicant. Another thing, which I have a large science communication background, so I'm really keen on this, is acronyms being defined. So that is really important and it can speak to your communication skills. So I would not assume that our reviewers know every acronym that you're putting. So please make sure you're spelling out acronyms. Also checking for misspelled words, grammatical errors. Take the time because Sea Grant, I would not rely on when you're filling in those questions that we're asking that Sea Grant's going to do the spell check for you. So I recommend having a separate document that you're providing your answers in that can go ahead and do that spell check for you and then dropping your answers into the applications. So we had a question come through, are there positions as well on the engineering side of coastal development resilience? That's a great question. It really depends on the agencies that have applied. So at this time, I can't definitively answer that. Of course, oftentimes, maybe there's an engineering aspect to certain agencies in terms of maybe you're working with an engineering department at Caltrans talking about a development on a bridge in terms of coastal flooding. So it really depends on the agency. So what I would recommend is when those positions are posted, you can really take a look and read through them and get a sense for yourself if there's that engineering side or coastal development side to it. For coastal resiliency, coastal development, I would say absolutely many of our positions integrate that. That's really a part of the bread and butter of the fellowships we try to offer. This is a policy fellowship. It's sort of integrated and built into coastal resiliency, coastal policy, coastal management. So absolutely you would get sort of that kind of position through this experience. The last thing for what our reviewers are looking for is, did your recommendation letters demonstrate knowledge of the applicant and their ability? So again, as I've been reiterating, this just ties back to picking letter writers that are going to really speak to who you are and speak to your experience. So being really thoughtful about that and who you're deciding is going to be really beneficial to you. So last thing to leave with, as we transition out of talking about the application, we're going to be moving on to our alumni Q&A here in a little bit. Some words of advice is to just look at your application as a whole. And when you finish your application, before you submit it, really look to see if it's missing anything. Does it really capture who you are as an applicant? Does it capture your personality through that icebreaker? Does it capture your professional goals? Does it capture your experience or your interest in the state of California in terms of ocean policy and coastal conservation? And think of it as a giant puzzle. What piece is missing before you submit? So every little thing definitely counts. Taking your time to make sure you have a really well thought out application and giving yourself enough lead is going to be really vital in making sure that you have the chance that you want to have and being selected for an in-person interview. So just some things to consider. And for the submission, you see right here in bright red, it's July 19th at 5 p.m. So the portal can sometimes get overwhelmed, EC Grant, when there's a lot of applicants trying to submit their applications. So we really encourage you to not wait until the last minute. If it's 4:30 and you're trying to hit submit, oftentimes the portal, again, could be overwhelmed and it might take couple minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes for that submission to actually happen. So we really encourage you to give yourself ample time to submit your application. So just definitely consider that, because right at 5 p.m., we cannot accept any late admissions. And that is because the system does not allow it. So we can't make any exceptions. So if you're emailing SG proposal at 5:01 saying, I can't submit my application, we're not going to be able to do anything to help you, unfortunately. And I want you to be successful in being able to submit an application if that's something you want to do. So definitely give yourself ample time for that due date. We have a couple other things listed, remembering to only submit PDFs. And you can register an account right away. You don't have to wait until you're ready to apply. You can just create your account now, sit and think about it, and then begin your application. Perfect. This is our last slide, and then we're going to move into our alumni Q&A. So this is our fellowship timeline, and this exact timeline is available on our website on the page where our fellowship opportunity for the state fellowship is provided with all of the information you need. So this, again, just sort of paints the landscape for what to expect in the upcoming year. Some dates you're going to want to remember is our due date for the application. So that's July 19th at 5 p.m. That's really important. And then as we move through, you can kind of see that we start to review these applications. At a certain point, we will notify you if you have been selected as a finalist. So that approximate date is the end of August. So August 28th is what we're aiming for right now. And then at that time, we'll invite you for an informational webinar specific to finalists. So it's going to be information that builds on what we talked about today, and it's going to be a lot more about what the next steps are, which is our virtual matching workshop. So this is where you meet the host agencies, where they get a chance to meet you. You're sharing presentation videos with one another. You're getting a chance to ask questions, and we're scheduling interviews. So this is what's going to be really mandatory, these dates at the bottom, if you're selected as a finalist. So that's our virtual matching workshop. So you can see when interviews are taking place, October 16th through 18th. And on the 18th, that's when you would, as a finalist, provide your top 10 host agencies that you're interested in. And then next week into the 23rd is when hosts would have follow-ups with the finalist. And then you can see when we want to announce those matches. So, if you're considering applying for this opportunity, I would definitely put those dates down in your calendar, because if you are selected as a finalist, then those are dates you're going to want to be available for. So those are important to remember. One last kind of point with all of this is that if you go through this whole process and you're matched with the agency, you are not required to say yes to that agency. So if you feel, you go through this whole process and you get placed with an agency, and we have a whole algorithm, we're really basing it off of your needs and your wants and who you want to be placed with, and also considering the host. And it's sort of a big web that we try to kind of beautifully put together and really create matches that are going to be harmonious. You're not required to have to stay with that match. You're allowed to say no. So I just want to kind of put that out there as well. All right, we're going to move into the alumni Q&A. I just want you to know that these really are, these 12 months are something that can really transform you and really inspire you to do some great change for the state of California and take that work even beyond the state. So it's a really exciting opportunity, and I'm really excited to have some alumni here who are going to kind of talk about their own experiences and how this has benefited them. So just a couple more questions coming through. Do all finalists get fellowship positions? No. So even if you are a finalist, you are not guaranteed a position. That was a great question to ask. Is there a reason to not tell your advisor yet that you are applying for the fellowship? Is it fine if the letters of recommendation come from undergraduate past advisors? So it's entirely up to you what you decide to share with your advisors. I know some graduate folks, maybe they have opportunities set up postgraduate with labs that you're working in, or with research under your PI. So we leave that up to you to be able to discuss. This is a fellowship opportunity that just continues to build upon what you've learned so far. So I think it's really with any job and throughout your career, it's really up to you at what point and when you find it appropriate to share that with your current program, whether that's a graduate program you're in, an academic program, a job. So we really leave that up to you to decide. And your letter writers can be someone who can just speak to your academic ability. So it depends on the degree. If you have, if this is a PhD student, we would want to hear about your experience through your PhD program, because undergraduate was kind of a while ago. If it's a master's, you can always ask someone from your undergraduate degree, but please consider that if your master's is what is focused in that ocean policy conservation work, and that's what's going to sort of highlight your ability as an applicant to do this fellowship, then having a professor or a staff member, faculty member be able to speak to your master's program is going to be really beneficial to you. So just kind of consider that with who you ask for your letter writers. All right, so we actually have all of our alumni here ready to go. And this last slide, just a reminder where you can email us, sgproposal@ucsd.edu. And we're going to be moving into our alumni Q&A session. So we do have a couple alumni that are going to be joining us today. I had one alumni who was not able to join us, and he wanted to make sure I shared his words of wisdom for you. He was he was one of two fellows in the second year of the program in 1989. So it's Dr. Robert Wilder, and he just wanted to say I was the second California Sea Grant Fellow in 1989. Had a wonderful time. It was also a different time back then, was a more wild place, and got to know personally many individuals in state assembly, Senate, lobbyists, etc. Happily, I've stayed on the same path with oceans and climate solutions as my career's work. It has been wonderful. I am grateful to California Sea Grant for that 1989 year. But my advice to all is make the most of this wonderful opportunity, meet lots of people, help everyone you can, non-scientists too, understand their perspectives and network like mad. So thank you to Rob for sharing that. And at this time, I do want to invite our alumni that are here with us today to join us. So they are slowly popping up on our screen here. And this portion is where you'll have a chance to hear from each of them to just introduce who they are and share a little bit about their experience as a state fellow and however much they want to share about where they are today. And then we'll be able to open it up to some questions. So I do want to just thank all of them for being here. And let's see. So I'm actually going to hand it off to Kat, if that's okay. I'm going to have Kat start us off. Kat, thank you for joining us. I would love it if you could just share about when you were a state fellow with what agency, and if you don't mind sharing a little bit about what you do today.
Sure. So my name is Kat Bashti. I was a Sea Grant Fellow in 2021 for the California Ocean Protection Council in their climate change program. And I am currently an assistant researcher at UC Santa Barbara, located down in Carlsbad, down in San Diego. And I am working on the San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station's mitigation monitoring program. So I am one of the PIs on that basically manage this long-term monitoring program that's been going on since about 2008, where we have built this large 373-acre artificial reef that we monitor annually and reference sites. And then we have a out-of-kind mitigation project in the form of a 150-acre wetland restoration in San Diego Lagoon in Del Mar, California, that we also monitor annually. And so that is what I am doing now. Do you want me to popcorn to someone?
I can pick somebody. Okay. But thank you, Kat, for sharing that. And just some context. So these three wonderful people offered to provide some time today to talk about their experience. And this is my chance getting to meet them as well. So it's nice to put a name to a face. So just thanks for being here. And Kat, wonderful to hear about what you're working on today. And if you have questions, as you hear what our three alumni are kind of working on and what they're doing, feel free to drop them in the Q&A, and we'll also open it up for questions as well, and we can create a back and forth dialogue. But I'll go ahead and pass it over to Emily to share a little bit.
Hi, everybody. My name is Emily Reisner. I was also a California Sea Grant State Fellow in 2021 with Kat. I was with the Delta Stewardship Council, specifically the Collaborative Science and Peer Review Unit. And currently, I am a research fisheries biologist with NOAA, specifically the Alaska Fisheries Science Center. And I'm all the way up in Kodiak, Alaska, which is a small island in southeastern Alaska. And my role is kind of split between two roles, I guess. I'm with the Shellfish Assessment Program up here, and part of it, one of my big roles is conducting primary research as a PI for the lab, specifically related to shellfish, but also climate change and how that's affecting commercial shellfish populations in the Bering Sea. But then the other half of my role is going out to the Bering Sea on these month-long surveys to assess the commercial crab populations in the Bering Sea. So if anybody's ever seen Deadliest Catch, I went out on a winter pot survey this last March on a Deadliest Catch vessel, actually, to see what's going on with red king crab in Bristol Bay. So part of my role is doing these surveys, but the majority of the year I'm doing research to see what's going on with the crab population. So yeah, I think the Sea Grant Fellowship has really set me up to be successful in the role I currently am in, and happy to answer any questions about that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emily. And I sort of touched on this earlier that, this fellowship and where our fellows have ended up. I said sometimes within the state of California, but also it might take you out of the state of California to continue that work, sort of on a whether it's a national level or just in a different state. So thanks for sharing, Emily. And I'm going to pop it back over to Catherine to share a little bit about what you do.
Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Cordier. I was a Sea Grant fellow I just had to look it up, 2017. Time flies. So I was a fellow with the Delta Stewardship Council, working with the Delta Science Program. And then after that, I actually worked for California Sea Grant as the research coordinator and coordinating some fellowships for about 3 years. And then in 2021, I actually decided to go back to school. So I'm currently a graduate student at UC Davis in the Department of Environmental Science and Policy, and I'm studying resource economics. So my thesis focuses on the impacts of marine protected areas on ecosystem services of kelp forests in California, specifically looking at changes in kelp forest fish biomass and how that has implications for commercial and recreational fisheries. So it's nice to be back and involved with the state fellowship. And yeah, it's an awesome opportunity. So happy to answer any questions that people might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yes, you can see too, with all of our fellows and our alumni, and I shared this number earlier, we are at a 308 total for our state fellows, including our 26 with our current cohort. So it's a large number of alumni to track and just to see their reach and what they've been up to. So if you have any questions for them, please drop them in our Q&A, but I'll kind of start us off with a question and we can go round robin to answer. So I think a question a lot of people want to know is maybe what was the biggest highlight from your fellowship, and maybe what was something that was challenging for you in your fellowship, but maybe in the long run you see it as sort of a highlight. So whoever would like to answer first.
Okay, I'll go. Okay, first part of the question was highlight. Okay, let's see. There were a lot of highlights in my fellowship. I really got really close to the team I worked with at the Ocean Protection Council. It was really hard to leave them because they just were a wonderful group. And working with them every day was such a pleasure, especially because for me and Emily, I assume for Emily too, we were remote because of COVID. And so I was a little bit worried that it was going to be hard to connect with everyone and to feel like part of the team, given that I was remote, but that was not the case. And so I feel like the highlight was how well I really gelled with everyone. And for me personally, I felt that connection at the interview stage. And so if you feel like you're vibing really well with one of the agencies, I would say trust your gut, because most likely that means you're going to have a really pleasant working environment with them. But I guess like tangible highlights, I had a lot of freedom in what I was able to do. And coming off from having taught a lot, I was really craving that like teaching itch that I wasn't otherwise getting from my fellowship. And so they kind of let me run wild and do this outreach, science communication, what I call it, I don't know, effort where I produced a ton of videos on these recently funded projects for the Ocean Protection Council. And I wrote corresponding blogs, and I got to go travel all up and down the state, interviewing people and editing and producing these videos. And they were presented at the Ocean Protection Council meetings. And so that was like this really cool, creative, tangible project that I otherwise wouldn't have anticipated being an option as a fellow, because it's a little bit, I don't know, unconventional. But I would encourage you all to, if you're interested in something and it's going to become an asset to the agency that you're working with, to pursue it and to ask, because most of the time they're super amenable to whatever it is you want to pursue. Challenge was the other one.
Any challenge, one challenge maybe, and maybe it's not so much a challenge now, but turn into
Sure.
a positive.
So I found, to be super honest, I found it really challenging to be a facilitator. Like in meetings as a fellow, you're often taking the meeting notes and organizing the meeting and facilitating a lot and moderating a lot. And as coming out of grad school where you are the expert in what you study, it was really hard for me to take a back seat and be like, this is not my chance to put in my opinion. And so that was actually really helpful for me, because knowing that that wasn't who I was or something I wanted to do, made me pivot back towards academia and being the expert in the room, being asked the questions instead of being the person asking the expert the questions. And so for me, it was really clarifying and illuminating to which way to pivot back to or towards. And so that was a challenge for me, is basically keeping my mouth shut and just facilitating, because I would want to chime in, and that's not what you're there for in every meeting, right? So especially big meetings with big wigs at these agencies, you're supposed to just tone it down a little bit.
That was great, Kat. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And funny enough, we hosted a NOAA facilitation workshop for our cohort this year, and it went really well. So agree, facilitation is something that oftentimes you're put on the spot to do, and but I'm sure you're a great facilitator now. I'm sure you've been put in many positions to facilitate, and experience helps for sure. We are having a couple questions come through the chat, unless Emily or Catherine, you had anything you wanted to share in terms of a highlight or a challenge from your fellowship.
I don't really have anything to add, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we're having a couple questions. So our first question was, did you all get your first choice of fellowship partner, or were they further down your list? If so, did you consider turning them down since it wasn't your first choice? Maybe Emily or Catherine, would you want to answer this?
I can answer this. So I did not get my first choice, but I will be honest in saying that I think I went into the matching workshop, which I don't know if you still call it that, but I kind of went in with a very closed mind of where I wanted to be. I was living in San Diego at the time, and I was determined to only live in San Diego and Santa Barbara. And so I was like, well, I don't want to be in Sacramento. I don't want to be in the Bay Area. And so yeah, I ended up with the Delta Stewardship Council, which actually I think was the best fit for me. And so even though it wasn't my first choice, I recognized that it still was an amazing choice. And I think, it all works out for the best. People say everything happens for a reason, and I feel like it really did. I got super lucky to work with an awesome team at the Delta Stewardship Council, and they actually let me continue working on a project I had started for my master's. They were super flexible about everything, and I was really nervous at first about being in Sacramento because I had friends from college who grew up there and said it was horrible, but I loved being in Sacramento, and I'm in Davis now. So I think it's really fun to kind of be at a really lively kind of center of policy making. I guess I can kind of tag on to the previous question of what one of my favorite experiences was, and got to run last minute to a lot of really cool policy briefings and go to really interesting talks at the Capitol and the State Resources Building. So I think that if I had turned down that opportunity, I would have missed out on a lot. And so I really encourage people to kind of have a more open mind when going into this process. And I know it's hard, especially when you just come out of grad school and you've really dedicated more than your fair share of your time to your subject area. And it can be a little disheartening sometimes to feel like you need to pivot. But I think this opportunity is very unique in that you can actually kind of test out a different area that you're probably otherwise not qualified for. So for instance, my background's in marine conservation and marine biology, and I think I would have been very poorly suited to if I had applied for a job at the Delta Stewardship Council. And so, yeah, I thought it was a great opportunity, and I'd do it again.
That's wonderful to hear. And we talked about that earlier, just keeping an open mind through this process is going to be, that'll be the way to get the best sort of experience out of it. Okay, so I want to make sure we have time for these questions coming through. So maybe Emily, I'll see if you could answer this next question. So how specific should the personal statement be regarding fellowship interests? Do we need to link our interest specifically to ongoing programs among the host, or can we just talk about our interests in general? So maybe Yeah, I don't know if Emily, you want to try, maybe Emily, you can speak to, if you remember with your application, what were some of the highlights you noted in terms of, we talked about creating a personal statement, talking about past experiences, but also really speaking to your graduate program. So sort of what was your approach in your application?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what I included in my personal statement, but I do remember, like, I guess kind of, like, I don't know, kind of talking more about skills that I wanted to gain through the fellowship as opposed to like specific programs that were being currently run by hosts. Because again, like Catherine was saying, like keeping an open mind, I think is a really good thing. And even if you're dead set on like a specific host, like you may not potentially get them and get even better experience through somebody that you didn't really expect to get. And I had a similar experience with Catherine where like my background is in marine ecology, and the Delta Stewardship Council was my first choice because I wanted that experience outside of what I had, like, I guess, experienced in my grad program. And I think that like that set me up for like future like job opportunities because I was able to adapt to different systems and different policies and so on. And so I guess going back to what I included in my personal statement, I think I focused more so on skills I wanted to gain through the fellowship as opposed to specific programs or host agencies. Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the other facet of the question was, but I'm sorry.
No, I think you answered perfectly. Just I think speaking to what skills you want to build and speaking to your experience, but not having to link to programs or partnerships or stakeholders involved in certain agencies, because realistically, that's not what you've been working on. You've been working on your degree program, so that's understandable. So I think you spoke to it perfectly, Emily. Okay. So our next question was there something during the interview process that the interviewers highlighted that you think allowed you to stand out in the application pool, maybe in terms of fit with the host or in general? So did any of you feel like you maybe had a certain component that helped you to stand out that maybe was mentioned in your interview or even mentioned with a certain host? I know it's a long time to think back to too. I'm sure it's a lot of it becomes a blur because a lot happens, but yeah, anything you think maybe helped you to stand out through the process?
I can answer quickly. During my grad program, we had, or at my university, we had a science policy group that kind of was pretty involved in a variety of policies with the state of California. And I was involved with them throughout most of my graduate career. And I think that really, I don't know if it stood out, but I know that a lot of people asked me about my experience in that policy group and what I had done. So I think I also remember when I was thinking about applying for this fellowship, a piece of advice I had is like, if you are interested in like environmental policy and so on, like try and see if there's any opportunities at the university that you're at right now to get involved in any way possible. First of all, to see if you like it. And then if you do, then apply to the state fellowship, and then that would maybe stand out as something. So
I would just add that for me, I had basically zero policy experience at all. I honestly didn't really even know what that meant, policy experience. But what I think might have made me stand out is that I think nowadays most of us do a lot of research that has some sort of applied nature, right? But maybe that applied piece is not in practice or hasn't been put in place or something like that, right? And so coming from like a more of an experimental field ecology background and similar to Emily, like marine ecology, community ecology background, I really wanted the fellowship to allow me to do more meaningful research. And I don't think you can really do more meaningful research without understanding what policy might be affected by your science or how science affects policy. and how to truly engage stakeholders in a meaningful way versus what you would put in like a statement that's very broad and not very committal, right, in like a proposal or something like that. And so I wanted to get a lot of experience in how to do meaningful science instead of just, I think I said like in my statement or in an interview, I don't want to just put a couple sentences at the end of a discussion that talk about the broader applicability of my science to policy and management. I want to actually know how to do that. And so, yeah, that's what I would say for me.
Thank you, Kat, and thank you, Emily. Absolutely, I think thinking about it through more of a cross-cutting component of maybe just not at the end of your application or just as a side note, but really understanding what you've done so far and has policy been integrated, and if not, thinking about it in a holistic approach. So I really liked that insight. So thank you so much. So we have another question, which you mentioned, Kat and Emily, you, or Kat at least, had their fellowship during COVID, during the pandemic. And I know, Catherine, you were pre-pandemic. So understanding these positions, if they're in person, hybrid, remote, I can just speak to what the current cohort looks like, and then I can let our alumni kind of chime in on that. But it is a combination of all three, essentially. So we have some positions that can be facilitated as fully remote. We also have some that are, the host agency wants you to be more in person, so you have to relocate to where maybe the host agency office is located at, a lot of them being up in the Sacramento area. And then some are a mix of both. So we have some fellows that fly in once a month using their travel funds for in-person meetings. So it really depends on the agency. But maybe, Catherine, you were pre-pandemic. So could you speak to maybe what your fellowship experience was like, when we were less in that hybrid virtual world?
Yeah, so it's funny because I remember being part of conversations at the Delta Stewardship Council where people were like requesting part remote, and it was like a very hard no, and they're like, there'll never be a time where you can work remotely, and now it's changed a lot. But yeah, so in 2017 and 2018, I went into the office every day, which I really liked. At the time, I don't know how many positions they have now, but the Delta Stewardship Council had 4 different fellows, and we all had our offices kind of together in a cubicle. So it kind of felt like being back in grad school again with like all of us together. So in terms of like, do you mean like in terms of like day to day what it looked like, or?
I think you kind of answered that in a sense, like you relocated for your fellowship.
Yes.
And I'm assuming, you had a lot of in-person meetings, probably a lot of site visits and things to that sort.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Tons of meetings. Most of them were like within the Stewardship Council. We also had like monthly council meetings. And one of my roles, was to present this like science report every month. So I had to be at those. And then I'd also attend other, like resource agency meetings that were in Sacramento. And I went on a couple of like different, they were more like professional development for me as opposed to like related to stuff that I did at the Delta Stewardship Council. But yeah, lots of like site visits to different places in the Delta and some field trips.
Great. It's interesting to hear you kind of with the Delta and hearing some of those similar things our current fellows do now, like the scientist report, and different things like that. So, you can kind of see to answer the question that some are very in person, but obviously we're now, sort of our societal landscape is we do a lot of things over remotely, and especially a lot of meetings. So Kat, did you mention that you had a fellowship that was during the pandemic?
Yeah, both Emily and I were
both
hybrid. Yeah, or not hybrid. We were remote, but I mean, the rules were loosening towards the end. And so I just did one visit to Sacramento where the whole team got together, which was lovely. And I wish that I had done more, or I had the ability to do that more. Because even though we're all so used to remote, nothing's better than in person. And so I do envy, Catherine, that she got to be able to do it a little bit more in a full immersion kind of thing, because you are in meetings all day. And so to be in meetings all day, but with like actual people instead of with your screen is probably preferred. but I didn't really notice anything because, you know, when you're at the end of your dissertation, you're sitting at your desk all day anyways. And so it wasn't like a huge, like, you know, culture shock. I was very used to doing that. But yeah, and it worked out fine. And it was really nice because, you know, you're in your own little space and you don't have to go in, I guess. But I don't know. I didn't feel one way or another like it was bad or good. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Kat. And Emily, if you want to share anything, or if Kat kind of captured that, you know, that was a time of transition. Yeah, so it seems like a time of transition. So now we're really out of, you know, those sort of requirements and restrictions. However, again, it's a new landscape of being able to hold a lot of those meetings virtually, but many of our current host agencies facilitate a lot of professional development that's in person, a lot of site visits. A lot of those sort of meetings, though, where it's different stakeholders at the table, are hosted virtually, unless it's something that has to be in person. So it really depends on the agency and where you're at. A lot of our San Diego agencies are in person. Again, it's something as the positions get posted in mid-July, you can be able to kind of read in more detail to understand sort of expectations and exactly where maybe you would be requested to go if it's something you have to relocate for, or if it's something you can do in a hybrid position or fully remote. So we had a question about the Delta Stewardship Council, more specifically, what was a typical day like? I know, Catherine, you kind of answered this a little bit in terms of a typical day. Did you have anything else to maybe add? Maybe a typical day as a fellow, like I think a question maybe our applicants might not know to ask, but is always something that is curious to bring up is, how do you approach these sort of tasks assigned to you as a fellow, knowing that you're not an employee, you're not an intern, you're not a student, but a fellowship being it's an educational training opportunity. So did you feel like you approached work differently, understanding that, or did you truly feel like you were just enveloped in it and felt like you were an employee of the agency you were with?
It's a good question. I'm trying to cast my mind back to all those years ago. I feel like it was kind of half and half. I feel like there was a lot that I didn't have to do because I wasn't an employee. I think I got a little more leeway with working on projects. I mean, it's something that all fellows sit down and create like a professional development plan with their mentor. And so when I started there as a fellow, the Delta Stewardship Council was really interested in kind of looking into starting more of like a social science dimension, or adding a social science dimension to a lot of the work they did. So they were really excited for me to like continue working on an economics project. So I think I kind of came at a right time where they were like, well, we just finished up revision to one of our management plans. The next revision isn't happening for a while. So just kind of, if you want to work on this project and apply it to the Delta, go for it. And so in terms of that, I think it felt a lot like grad school. I kind of did my own thing. But then there were certain duties that I had to do that were like monthly, like the lead scientist report. And so those kind of had hard deadlines of when I had to have different things due. And so in that respect, it kind of felt more like a position. I will say I got to attend a lot of meetings that I think if I was just brought on as like a entry level scientist, I probably wouldn't have. And so that's kind of nice. I feel like you get a lot of the benefits of a job, like a full-time job, without a lot of the drawbacks. Like you kind of get to skip a lot of, I think, like the bureaucracy that's inherent in state positions and kind of just get to the fun parts. But you also know that it exists. So I think it really prepares you for having like a realistic idea of what going into a state agency could be like.
That's great insight. Thank you. And agree that, being a fellow and state fellowship being around for as long as it has, it really, our agencies really value that we provide this opportunity at Sea Grant, and, the mentors and supervisors at the agencies are really, enthused and inspired for the fellows and the experience that they get. So it was nice to hear kind of firsthand a little bit. Emily or Kat, did you have anything to add from your perspective of like feeling like a fellow versus employee, and sort of how did you navigate that, and or if it ever really came up, or, all projects just hit the ground running essentially?
I can just quickly add that I felt like you have more of an opportunity to explore as a fellow than maybe as an employee, where you have maybe a rigid set of, I guess, like, I'm trying to think of the word, like, goals for an employee. Like, I feel like there was one week where there was an opportunity for me to like go out with the Department of Fish and Game on a sturgeon survey in the Delta. And I don't feel like if I was an employee, like I would have been able to have the opportunity, because it was very last minute. I was like, oh, like, Emily, like, would you like to help out with this? Like, and I was like, yes, of course I would. And so I feel like, yeah, you have more of an opportunity to explore your interests, as opposed to, you know, you're hired on to fulfill a specific role and specific tasks. So I really enjoyed that aspect. Yeah.
I would just add, for my experience, I felt like from day one, I was definitely treated like an employee at OPC. It's a really busy agency. They do a lot, and they have to treat in a way, they sort of have to treat their fellows like employees, so that you can like hit the ground running and start to really contribute. That said, you get like a little bit of time to kind of get your feet under you and read a lot and get up to speed. But my typical day was, you know, if I wasn't doing one of my like fun little SciComm things that I would be off doing, you know, and going in all over the state, I was often in meetings all day long, like back-to-back meetings all day long. And so that was a little bit of an adjustment for me, just to be used to a lot of meetings, like, because in grad school, you're not in back-to-back meetings all day. It's like such a grown-up thing to do, right? And so I'd be in back-to-back meetings, and then you're like faced with, okay, when do I actually like do the work that all these meetings talked about? And so that's like definitely something that, you know, took a little bit of navigating, but then was awesome, because I wasn't trying to go from, you know, grad school, which is really intense and you're super busy, to something that wasn't super intense. And so I think you can like be really candid in your interview and just ask how integrated is the fellow into day-to-day operations. And if they say, you know, you're treated like an employee and you're responsible for a whole bunch of things, and that speaks to you, then that might be a good match. And that's kind of what I was looking for. It just, was an adjustment. Being in all those Teams meetings all day long was an adjustment, but also it gives you a really good endurance for when you move on to the next thing, or you stay with the host agency, because you're like ready to go.
Thank you, Kat. It's just really great to hear that. And I think thinking about when's a prospective applicant, if they're selected as a finalist, kind of gets to that matching phase, understanding if that's something that they want to, you know, ask those sorts of questions for the host. So that's an opportunity when you can ask those more granular details of what are their expectations, so that you're, you know, really thinking about who you want to kind of put in your top choices during that whole process. And I think a lot of us can relate to the meeting marathon. So definitely something that just builds and grows as you move throughout your career. So I want to be respectful. We have about 2 minutes left. There were two really quick questions here. And they were just talking about, if you put a fully remote option in your application, does that decrease your chances of getting the fellowship? The application is such an early step. We asked that on the application just to get an idea of your willingness to either if you're willing to relocate, if you're not. So, you know, I would just think about with your application, if you're really set on, you know, you are someone who cannot relocate, it's fine that you put that. It doesn't necessarily mean it decreases your chances at all. We're really looking at the application material. So that option is not something that we're weighing in that evaluation criteria that I had shared a couple slides ago. So your willingness to move or relocate, or if you want to stay put, that's something that kind of, I think, is more considered down the road if selected as a finalist with different host agencies. So that'll be something that's considered then, but not something that's weighted during the application phase when we're reviewing them. And then is there any host that will be within the Los Angeles area? So again, they're tentative positions still. So I encourage you to go check out the host once we post this webinar on our webpage, and you can kind of see where they're located. You know, the Los Angeles area isn't a big area. We have a lot of fellows situated. I'd say Santa Barbara is the closest. We have some fellows in the San Luis Obispo area, but it really depends. If it's a remote position, you would be able to be in the Los Angeles area, but I would encourage you to wait until those host positions are finalized to kind of to be able to find out that information then. So with that, we're beautifully ending right at 1:30. I just want to take the time, just thank you, Kat, thank you, Emily, thank you, Catherine, for taking time out of your day to join us and just speak to your experience as a state fellow. I know I learned a lot, and I really appreciated just hearing your perspectives, and appreciate you also recollecting too, because you know, you've moved on and have very busy careers now, and I'm sure you've done so much since your time as a fellow. But you know, I think it's important that people hear from those who've gone through the experience. So I just want to say thank you for joining us, and thank you to everyone who joined the webinar today. So this will be posted on our website later today, so you can come back and watch this recording. As always, you can always reach out through the SG proposal at ucsd.edu. If you have any questions about your application in terms of the EC grant portal or anything else that you might want to answer. So just thank you so much, everyone, and reach out if you have any questions. So thank you for taking time today, and best of luck through the process if you decide to join us along the way.